Okay, I want to stop for a moment and talk a little about hypnotic phenomena. Erickson often spent a long time in teaching people, teaching patients, clients, to experience phenomena: catalepsy, hand or arm levitation, visual or auditory hallucinations. He knew that if the patient experienced a wealth of hypnotic phenomena, he would be very convinced of the power of the hypnotic state and would expect to be helped. Now, most therapists seem quite a bit uncertain about hypnosis. Now, that's a strange thing to say, but it's true. They start off by talking about most therapy is done in a very shallow state of hypnosis, hardly any different, really, from the waking state. Some therapists actually bend over backwards to protect themselves from having the patient say, "I didn't feel hypnotized." And that's the type of thing they say. It's a shallow stage, hardly any different, really, from the waking state. And lo and behold, at the end of the session, the patient says, "I didn't feel hypnotized." It was a really beautiful programming job. So beautiful that the hypnotist should really be proud of himself. He did a really marvelous piece of suggestion work. Anyhow, what can the poor hypnotist do? People will come with all sorts of stories about stage hypnotists. Marvelous hypnotist in that TV play last night. He snapped his fingers and the woman went right out, and he'd never even met her before that man. And the hypnotist quails inside. He knows he can't even snap his fingers, let alone put anyone right out. And in a desperately defense way, he says, "That's not really hypnosis. You see, what happens is that therapy is done in a very shallow state." And the patient listens obligingly, and behind the attentive face is the thought, "Oh dear, is this going to work?" And however much the hypnotist explained, the more the patient becomes convinced there's something wrong. And after the session, if he's outspoken, he'll say, "I didn't really feel hypnotized." If he's a nice guy, and most people are, he'll keep that thought to himself and try to cheer up the hypnotist by saying, "I felt very relaxed." And a good percentage will go away thinking it was their fault, really, because I didn't try hard enough. And lots of them will think they can't be hypnotized. So what can the poor hypnotist do so that he knows that he's been hypnotized? You can know a lot about a person's body language and respond to the body language. That's one way. Actually, hypnosis is primarily a state in which there is an increased responsiveness to ideas of all sorts. And one should employ that responsiveness not by trying to force, but by trying to elicit, trying to get an immediate response, and to get it by having the subject participate. I never tell a subject to relax. I never tell a subject to get tired. I never tell a subject to get sleepy, get more tired, more sleepy. That is an effort to dominate. It's much better to suggest he can get tired. He can get sleepy. He can go into trance. It's always better to offer the opportunity of responding to an idea. And if this permissive approach is linked to utilizing the subject's unconscious body language, then the subject feels free to respond to a remarkable degree. And by unconscious language, I mean eye blinks, eye scan patterns, predicates of speech, lower lip size, facial tonus, facial color changes, breathing, pulse rate, gesture, body movement, posture, and lots of other things of which the subject is unaware. Now, by careful questioning and observation, an informed hypnotherapist, psychotherapist, is able to find the first step of a person's mental strategy, and the final stage, the end product, what the client is aware of. Now, we all have our own mental strategies, ways of thinking that are peculiar to us. Strategies which have been used by us for such a long time that they are streamlined and operate in an incredibly swift manner. Very few people are aware of what goes on in their heads. They come for therapy and the dialogue is so often like this. Why are you depressed? Well, I don't know, I'm just depressed suddenly. If you awaken and seem to be happy because it's a lovely day, how quickly does the depression start? It could be any time. Take yesterday. I woke up feeling quite well, but suddenly, while I was having my breakfast, I was depressed. What were you thinking of just before you were depressed? I don't know. Generally, heads are full of dialogue, internal conversation, internal comment, picture, that all produce feeling. We are responsible for our response to people and situations. How many times do we hear, he makes me angry, he makes me angry? Anger is one of the choices that the person has. He doesn't have to take that choice. But habitual mental processes of which the person is unaware compels him to make the response, the choice of anger. Now, the bulk of what happens in the head is on an unconscious level, which evokes certain feelings. One way of seeing a person's mental strategy is to watch his eyes and listen to the processed words of his speech. Watch the person's eyes. And a client says, I'm just sitting by myself and suddenly I feel depressed. What was his eyes doing? You can ask, what were you thinking about just before that? Nothing really. Did you say anything to yourself or hear any words or see any pictures, imagine anything? No, nothing. And yet you could have seen their eyes flickering to V, A, K, anywhere. Through informed observation, one can know that he said something to himself, saw an internal picture, both of which triggered off the depressed feeling. But the internal dialogue and picture were outside of the person's conscious awareness. He was only aware of the feeling that was evoked. Our simple stopgap way of therapy is to interrupt the mental strategy, or include another step, or even reverse the strategy. This, of course, runs counter to the generally accepted idea of therapy. Find the cause is the usual cry. And that is one way of doing it. But it's only one way, and it can be a damned expensive way. Hypnotherapy is most likely to be a last resort therapy. Never forget that. Everything else has been tried first, and with each thing tried, some people get cured. But hypnotherapists get to failure. The woman who had a total of 22 years of psychoanalysis, problem was pulling hairs out of her head. At the end of 22 years, she still had the problem. Tom, 17 years of analysis that had filled him with the idea that he wasn't to blame, it was his parents. It took me 3 solid hours to brainwash him, or de-brainwash him, really, before he was able to accept that he created his own problem. Therapy proceeded smoothly after that. Now, there's a cry against hypnotherapists, and that is, you only treat symptoms. I wonder how many people who are on Valium or Librium, etc., are being treated for anything other than symptoms. People come for therapy wanting to get rid of their problems. An interesting thing that has occurred with lots of them, They've got into the symptom habit. Let's take an example. Leela. She was a nurse, working in a hospital local to me. She flew back to this country, had no sleep for the day, flew back overnight, went on duty almost as soon as she got back to this country. Dead tired, she went on duty. One of the early things that she had to do was to give an injection, and she was so tired that she noticed her hand trembling. And there was a doctor there, and a sister there, and they undoubtedly noticed the trembling hand. Anyhow, the next time she had to give an injection, she found her hand trembling again, although she wasn't tired. She hadn't related the first time of trembling to the tiredness. To cut a very long story short, after that, Leela found that with a lot of the things that she was having to do, when there was anyone in authority near her, her hands started to shake. Got so bad that she stopped hospital nursing and went into agency nursing. It followed her there, the problem I mean. Followed her into not only the work with patients, but also into her private life. She'd go into a shop to buy something, and if she didn't have cash and she had to make out a check, she'd find that the hand would start shaking when she was signing the check, and she so often just left with an excuse, not even taking the goods that she had wanted, saying that she changed her mind. The day that she came to see me, she'd phoned me and booked it a few days before, and she said, what drove me here really was the fact that I went into the shoe shop quite close to you. Wanted a pair of shoes there that I liked. I hadn't got the cash, so I decided to use a check, but I found my hand was shaking so much that I rushed out of the shop saying, I've changed my mind. It had got even as bad as that in the local Barclays bank. She was thinking of changing her bank because to get money out of the bank, she used to go there, look inside. After a while of going to just about every bank clerk and having a shaking hand and going out, she looked into the Barclays to see if there was anyone on behind the counter that she'd never been to before. Interesting, actually. How do you sign your check? Generally, you're looking down as you sign the check and looking down to the right. I taught her to sign the check over to the left, which then brought in was another accessing pattern and didn't access feeling so well. But the best way that she found after we'd had lots of discussion was to actually hold the checks up at eye level and sign it then. A nice cure. Cure? She had no problem. Now, as I said, the cry against hypnotherapies is so often you only treat symptoms. And yes, the people crying that states that if you lose one symptom, you'll get another symptom in its place. I agree with you. That can sometimes happen. Some people do have other symptoms replacing the ones that they came to therapy with. So, one set of unpleasant symptoms were, after a time, replaced with another set of unpleasant symptoms with some people, with a certain person. That shouldn't really happen, and would not happen if the therapist had used methods which included an ongoing reassessment approach. Give an illustration of that. A woman comes with presenting symptoms of anxiety. Therapy should include not only an alleviation of symptoms, or replacing those symptoms with something much more acceptable to the conscious mind, but an ongoing unconscious reassessment. At an unconscious level, there is an immediate awareness of an impending return to the old unpleasant symptom. At that moment, if therapy had taken account of this possibility, a creative part of the woman's unconscious mind could have stepped in to create another way, or several other ways of responding. In this way, those other earlier symptoms don't return. But we go into that much more at a later date. One of the things that we do is reframing. Reframing and taking into account the possibility of unpleasant symptoms returning.